What if one of the smartest decisions you can make is to make no decision at all?
It sounds completely counterintuitive, right?
Right. I mean, think about your morning today. You probably made, I don't know, 50 choices before you even finished your first cup of coffee.
Oh, easily. Probably way more than that, honestly.
Yeah, like you decided whether to hit snooze or which email to reply to first. You decided what to wear, what to pack for lunch, whether to listen to the news or just put on music.
It's just a constant stream.
It is. We live in this world that absolutely demands constant, relentless action. If you're standing still, society basically tells you you're falling behind.
Exactly. But, well, today we're going to completely dismantle that assumption.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I want to frame our entire mission today for you listening. This is not just some, quick life hack discussion.
No, definitely not.
We are treating this as a serious historical and philosophical study. Really, it's for students, executives, lifelong learners, anyone who's frankly just exhausted by the modern hustle culture.
And that hustle culture is everywhere.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we're going to examine the hard neuroscience of why making unnecessary choices actually physically drains your brain. We'll look at how top-tier executives use deliberate delay to avert global catastrophes. And we want to give you a framework to stop fighting battles you just don't need to fight.
Because today, we are going to look deeply at a concept known as Falkland's Law.
Falkland's Law. Okay, so break that down for us.
Sure. At its core, the law is built on a very stark, almost uncomfortable premise. The rule is simply, if you don't have to make a decision, don't make it.
Wow. If you don't have to make a decision, don't make it. It's so simple, but it challenges the whole modern belief that motion always equals progress.
Right, because the urge to act is just deeply ingrained in us. When we're faced with ambiguity, we want to resolve it immediately. We want to close the loop,
Yeah, like if an email comes in, the modern reflex is to answer it within 60 seconds, just to prove our efficiency.
Exactly. Or if a market dips, we want to buy or sell. If there's a conflict, we want to intervene. We constantly conflate being decisive with being in control.
But you're saying that's an illusion.
It is. Premature decision-making is actually a relinquishment of control because it forces you to commit your resources, your time, your capital before the landscape has fully revealed itself.
Right. To really grasp the weight of this, we need to trace it back to its roots because the sources we're pulling from today, they anchor this philosophy in two really distinct narratives.
Yeah, let's look at the history first.
Let's do it. Let's start with the historical anchor.
Yeah.
Who actually gave this law its name?
So the namesake is Lucius Carey. He was the second Viscount Falkland operating in 17th century England.
Okay, 17th century. That's a pretty intense time period.
Oh, incredibly intense. This is a critical context because the 1640s in England were defined by absolute violent volatility. You have the build-up to the English Civil War.
Right, the tension between King Charles I and the Parliament.
Exactly. And that tension is literally tearing the fabric of the nation apart. Ideological, religious, political divides are forcing everyone into these radicalized camps.
So the pressure on anyone in a position of influence to declare a side or mobilize or take immediate forceful action, that must have been suffocating.
Suffocating is the perfect word. It was an ultimate with us or against us environment.
Okay, let's unpack this because I'm putting myself in his shoes and my immediate skeptical reaction is to wonder if Viscount Falkland was just dodging responsibility.
Right, the cowardice argument.
Yeah, like when the political temperature gets that high, taking a stance means making enemies. So is his philosophy of making no decision just a high-minded excuse for political cowardice.
It's really easy to view it that way through our modern lens, a lens that praises rapid disruption. But looking at his actual historical record, his restraint was incredibly deliberate.
Yeah.
And it was highly strategic.
Okay, so what's the difference there?
Well, cowardice is avoiding a necessary action out of fear of the consequences. Falkland's approach was completely different. It was about understanding the actual mechanics of chaos.
The mechanics of chaos, I like that phrase.
He recognized that in a highly complex, rapidly destabilizing environment like a civil war, every single forceful action triggers a disproportionate and often irreversible chain reaction.
Unintended consequences.
Exactly. He knew he couldn't see the bottom of the staircase, so he just refused to take a step in the dark unless someone was actively pushing him.
Wow. So his philosophy was literally a structural reluctance to force change.
Precisely. If a decision regarding statecraft or allegiance did not absolutely require resolution that specific day, he refused to finalize it.
Because things could change tomorrow.
Right. He understood that time is actually a mechanism that reveals data. By waiting, tomorrow might bring a shift in Parliament's demands, or a concession from the king, or just a change in the public mood.
So by not acting prematurely, he preserves his options.
He preserves his optionality, yes. And that distinction between passive avoidance and active strategic waiting, that's the entire fulcrum of Falkland's Law.
That makes a lot of sense. And to bring that abstract political philosophy down to a human level, the source material actually provides a really brilliant allegorical tale.
The story of Emma and Benjamin.
Yes, it's the story of a village appropriately named Falkland and its wisest elder, Benjamin.
It serves as a really perfect bridge from historical statecraft to personal psychology.
Yeah, so in this narrative, we have Emma. She's a young woman who seeks out Benjamin because she is just utterly depleted. And the sources are very specific about her symptoms.
Right, she isn't physically laboring all day in the fields or anything.
No, not at all. She describes her mind as being trapped in this labyrinth of racing thoughts. She's constantly running simulations, like, should I take this job next year? What if this relationship doesn't work out? Should I move to the city or stay in the village?
It's endless.
It is. She's paralyzed, she's frustrated, and she describes feeling completely drained of all physical energy just from thinking.
And in behavioral psychology, we see this constantly. Emma is caught in a state of hypersimulation.
Hypersimulation, what does that mean exactly?
It means she is attempting to solve variables that haven't even crystallized yet. She is treating hypothetical future scenarios with the exact same cognitive urgency as an immediate present tense physical threat.
Oh man, I think everyone listening can relate to that. Treating a hypothetical like an emergency.
We all do it.
So she goes to Benjamin and he listens to this whole outpouring of anxiety. And instead of giving her, a 5-step plan to organize her life, he just drops the law on her.
He says, when there is no need to make a decision, don't make a decision.
Right. And for Emma, this is a systemic shock. She realizes she has been burning all her fuel trying to pre-solve tomorrow's problems today.
Which is such a common trap. She thought she was being responsible by planning.
But she was actually just self-inflicting massive decision fatigue.
The fundamental realization for Emma, and honestly for anyone trying to apply this, is recognizing the boundary line between a present necessity and a future possibility.
That's powerful.
The moment you stop treating future possibilities as present emergencies, a massive amount of cognitive bandwidth is freed up.
Wait, I want to pull on that thread right there. Cognitive bandwidth. Because allegories are wonderful for framing a mindset, sure. But is Emma's exhaustion just a poetic metaphor for feeling stressed? Or is there an actual, literal biological cost to what she's doing?
Oh, it is entirely biological.
So if I sit on my couch and agonize over a career move I don't even need to make for 6 months, am I actually doing physical damage to my daily energy level?
Yes, you absolutely are. And this brings us into the hard science from the sources, specifically looking at insights drawn from Dr. Rafiq Dar's work.
Okay, tell us about Dr. Dar's research.
His work focuses on the neuroscience of mental energy. To understand this, we have to look at the brain not as some magical, infinite thinking machine, but as a biological organ that consumes physical resources.
Right, it runs on fuel, just like a muscle.
Exactly. Specifically, the prefrontal cortex. That's the area of your brain responsible for executive function, logic, and complex decision-making.
The part of the brain that basically separates us from instinct-driven animals.
Yes, the rational center. And that prefrontal cortex runs on glucose. It requires immense amounts of metabolic energy to function properly.
Okay.
Dr. Dar's research highlights a concept called ego depletion, or decision fatigue. Every single choice you make, no matter how trivial it seems, like choosing a brand of toothpaste or deciding how to phrase a casual email or agonizing over Emma's hypothetical future career, every choice burns a fraction of that finite daily glucose reserve.
It makes me think of a computer's RAM, the random access memory.
That's a great analogy, actually.
Like if I have 50 tabs open in my web browser, my computer's fan starts spinning, the battery drains, the whole system slows down.
Yeah.
And that happens even if I'm only actively reading one single tab at that moment.
Yes. All those other tabs are just running in the background.
Exactly. So those unmade decisions, those hypothetical futures we constantly agonize over, they are just background tabs eating up our cognitive RAM.
That is a highly accurate mechanical way to look at it. And what happens when your cognitive RAM is maxed out and your prefrontal glucose is depleted?
I'm guessing the system crashes.
Basically. Your brain fundamentally changes how it operates. It starts looking for shortcuts. It begins to default to impulse, to bias, and to path of least resistance thinking. You literally lose the biological capacity to weigh complex variables.
That is terrifying.
Dr. Dar actually gives a really relatable shopping example in the sources to illustrate this exact depletion.
Oh yeah, the electronics store example. Let's walk through that because I think we've all lived this.
Okay, so imagine you go to an electronics store. Your mission is very specific and very important. You need to buy a new laptop for your business.
Right, and this is a high-stakes decision. You need to compare processors, RAM, warranty terms, price points. You really need your prefrontal cortex firing on all cylinders for this.
But on the way to the computer section, you happen to pass a big display of smart home lighting systems.
Yep. And you had zero intention of buying smart lights when you woke up this morning. It is a fundamentally unnecessary decision.
But you stop anyway. You pick up the box. You spend 20 minutes reading the specs. You start debating whether you really need voice-controlled lights in the kitchen.
You're calculating if you can afford it, wondering if it's even compatible with your phone.
Right. You are running a massive, complex mental simulation for an item you don't even need.
And mechanically, by doing that, you are actively burning the exact cognitive fuel that was required for your primary mission.
Exactly. By engaging with an unnecessary decision, you drain the biological resources you needed for the necessary one.
So when you finally put those smart lights down and walk over to the laptop aisle, your brain is already compromised.
It's depleted.
You look at the laptop specs, and the numbers just blur together.
Oh.
The friction of analyzing the data suddenly feels way too heavy. So instead of making a strategic choice, you just buy the one that looks the nicest. Yeah, maybe the one the salesperson pushes on you.
You make a terrible, impulsive choice on the crucial item because you exhausted your battery on a phantom decision.
That is just wild to think about. And we see this play out in high-stakes environments too, right? Like academic settings.
Oh, constantly. If we take this neurological reality and apply it to a student sitting for a major career-defining exam, the concept of strategic decision timing literally becomes the difference between passing and failing.
Let's dive into that, because we really want to frame this for students. An exam feels like an environment where you absolutely have to make decisions. The clock is ticking. You are forced to act.
You are forced to act eventually, yes, but the sequence of when you act is where Falkland's Law really applies.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine a student opens their exam, and question number 3 is incredibly dense. It's this complex, multi-step problem that they just don't immediately know how to solve.
Right. The instinct, driven by the pressure of the clock and the environment, is to attack it immediately. They think, I must figure this out right now before I move on.
Because they feel that primal urge to force a resolution. They don't want to leave a blank space behind them. It feels like a failure.
But mechanically, what are they actually doing to their brain in that moment?
They are forcing a premature, high-friction decision. They sit there for 10 or 15 minutes, grinding their cognitive gears, experiencing really high anxiety, and actively depleting their prefrontal cortex's limited reserves.
And even if they eventually guess the answer, they have paid a massive metabolic price.
A huge price. And the tragic part is what happens an hour later.
When they hit the end of the test.
Yes, they finally reach the end. Questions 45 through 50 are actually topics they studied extensively. They should be easy wins.
But because they burned all their RAM fighting question 3, their brain is in a state of severe decision fatigue.
Exactly. So they misread a simple prompt, they drop a negative sign in a basic equation, they select air when they meant B, they lose points on questions they fundamentally know the answers to.
Not because of a lack of knowledge, but because of a lack of strategic cognitive rationing. That is so frustrating.
It is. But a student applying Falkland's Law looks at question 3 entirely differently. They look at it and say, I do not have the immediate insight to solve this right now. A decision is not strictly necessary at this exact minute because I have 47 other questions I can address first.
Right. They just skip it, they bypass the trap.
They sweep through the entire exam, harvesting all the easy points using minimal cognitive energy, and then they return to the hard problem with whatever fuel they have left.
So prioritization in that academic context isn't just about time management.
No, it is biological resource management. Weighting is an active strategy to maximize total performance.
That is brilliant. Okay, so we've established the baseline here. Unnecessary decisions drain our energy in daily tasks like shopping and in academic settings like exams. But those are relatively sterile, logical environments.
They are.
What happens when we take this really delicate biological system and we inject a massive dose of human emotion? Like if I'm terrified or furious or wildly excited, how does that impact the application of Falkland's Law?
Well, it creates a highly volatile, often destructive cocktail. Under extreme emotional pressure, the human brain undergoes what psychologists call an amygdala hijack.
An amygdala hijack.
Yes, the amygdala is the ancient primal part of the brain responsible for processing fear, threat, and intense emotion. When it detects a high-stress trigger, it essentially short-circuits the logical prefrontal cortex. It initiates the fight-or-flight response.
So it basically screams, do something, anything right now.
Exactly. The discomfort of sitting with uncertainty, of feeling fear or intense excitement, it becomes psychologically intolerable.
We just can't stand it.
We can't. We don't make hasty decisions because the situation actually demands immediate action. We make them because we demand immediate relief from our own uncomfortable emotions.
We want the anxiety to end, so we pull the trigger.
We act just to break the tension.
The sources offer a really powerful medical scenario to illustrate the danger of this.
Yes, the ambiguous mass example.
Right. Imagine a patient gets the results of a routine medical scan, and the doctor says they've found an ambiguous mass. It's a preliminary finding. They don't know if it's benign or malignant yet.
The uncertainty in that specific moment is agonizing. It is a pure, unadulterated threat response.
So let's say this patient is completely consumed by fear. They cannot sleep. The uncertainty is just eating them alive. They go back to the doctor and say, I don't care what it is, I can't live with this anxiety, cut it out, schedule the surgery for tomorrow.
Driven entirely by the emotional need to feel like they are taking control.
Exactly, and so they rush into an invasive, aggressive, highly risky procedure.
They make a massive, irreversible biological commitment based entirely on preliminary data, purely because the emotional weight of waiting was too heavy.
Now contrast that with a patient who, facing the exact same terrifying scan, applies Falkland's Law. They pause and they ask their oncologist one simple question. Is my life in immediate, acute danger today?
And the doctor says, no, even if it is malignant, it is slow-moving, we have time.
Right. So that patient must now perform the incredibly difficult task of tolerating the fear. They have to choose strategic patience over immediate relief.
Which is so hard to do.
It is. But they wait. They schedule a targeted biopsy. They send the scans to a specialist in another state for a second opinion. They allow the mechanism of time to generate more accurate data.
And because they waited, the biopsy reveals the mass is highly localized and manageable with a localized, non-invasive treatment.
Right. The first patient suffers the lifelong physical complications of an unnecessary surgery purely because their fear demanded a premature decision. The second patient endures the psychological discomfort of waiting and preserves their physical health.
That is the ultimate cost of premature action driven by emotion. And what's fascinating is we see this exact same psychological vulnerability exploited and amplified at a massive scale in financial systems.
Oh, absolutely.
If you look at global market panics, you are essentially witnessing the medical scan scenario multiplied by millions of people simultaneously.
Like 2008. Or the wild market crash at the onset of COVID in March 2020. I remember looking at my retirement portfolio during that week in 2020 and watching years of savings just evaporate on the screen. The visceral, stomach-dropping fear is very, very real.
Oh, of course it is.
The instinct is, I have to stop the bleeding. I need to sell everything and go to cash right now.
But if we analyze the mechanics of panic selling, what are you actually doing in that moment? When the market drops 30%, that loss is entirely theoretical as long as you hold the asset.
Right.
The moment you let fear drive you to hit the sell button, you transform a theoretical temporary dip into a permanent locked-in loss. You literally guarantee the bad outcome.
You make a decision that isn't necessary. Unless you are literally retiring that specific week and need the cash to buy groceries, you do not have to make a decision about a 30-year retirement portfolio during a 2-week volatility spike.
Exactly. The investors who applied strategic restraint during the 2008 crash or the 2020 crash, they asked themselves, does this crisis force me to act today? Recognizing the answer was no, they did the hardest thing possible.
They did nothing.
They did nothing, they closed their laptops, they waited, and historically the markets self-correct and recover. The people who delayed their decision allowed the external environment to stabilize, and their wealth rebounded.
Wow. So fear is a powerful catalyst for terrible choices. But the sources also point out that excitement and greed can be just as blinding, right?
Oh, completely.
Let's talk about the corporate obsession with FOMO, the fear of missing out. Because the sources use the 2022 metaverse hype cycle as the ultimate modern case study for this.
The metaverse boom is a masterclass in how collective boardroom excitement overrides rational executive function.
It really is.
In late 2021 and 2022, there was this sudden, massive narrative shift in the business world. The story was that virtual reality and digital real estate were going to instantly replace the physical internet.
I remember the headlines. Every tech blog, every venture capitalist was screaming that if your company wasn't building a metaverse strategy today, you were going to be the next blockbuster video.
Right, the narrative was, you will be obsolete in a year.
So the pressure on CEOs was immense. And instead of applying Falkland's law, instead of waiting to see if consumer behavior actually matched the technological hype, thousands of companies panicked.
They felt the overwhelming urge to, plant their flag.
Yes, they diverted billions of dollars in capital, they acquired VR startups at absurd valuations, and completely pivoted their long-term roadmaps.
They made colossal, company-altering financial decisions based purely on the excitement of a hypothetical future.
And then, 2023 and 2024 arrived. The VR headsets remained clunky. The public didn't want to attend virtual board meetings as cartoon avatars.
Yeah.
And the user engagement statistics just completely flatlined.
The capital incinerated during that hype cycle was staggering. And what's fascinating here is that all of that risk could have been entirely mitigated by the application of executive restraint.
Just by waiting.
Just by waiting. If leadership had simply stepped back and said, we do not need to make a billion-dollar pivot today. We will let the early adopters take the bleeding edge risk. We will observe the actual utility of the technology, and if consumer adoption reaches a critical mass, we will enter the market then.
They could have just waited 18 months to see if it was a real revolution or just a mirage. Doing nothing would have saved them billions. It proves that sometimes doing nothing allows a problem to basically resolve itself.
It does. And if we scale this concept up from corporate boardrooms to global statecraft, we enter the realm of high-stakes leadership.
Which is where this gets incredibly intense.
It really does. When we study the most successful executives and world leaders, we find a consistent pattern that runs completely counter to the modern move fast and break things mantra.
Right.
For them, delaying action is not a manifestation of indecision. Delaying action is a highly cultivated, calculated leadership asset.
And the historical case study the sources provide for this is terrifyingly high stakes. It's the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962.
It is widely considered the closest humanity has ever come to global nuclear annihilation.
Let's examine the architecture of the decision President John F. Kennedy faced here. American spy planes discovered that the Soviet Union is secretly constructing nuclear missile sites in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida.
Right. And once operational, these missiles could strike Washington, D.C. in minutes.
The pressure inside the White House must have been beyond human comprehension. Kennedy convenes the ExComm, his top military and political advisors, and the initial overwhelming consensus from his military generals, particularly figures like Air Force Chief Curtis LeMay, is to act with maximum immediate violence.
They demand a swift, massive airstrike to obliterate the missile sites before they become fully operational.
They are operating on pure military logic, which dictates that every hour you wait, the enemy fortifies their position and your tactical advantage degrades.
The primal urge to eliminate the threat immediately is at an absolute fever pitch. They are presenting Kennedy with a binary choice: strike now or submit to nuclear blackmail.
But if I'm Kennedy, I have to be thinking, if I authorize this airstrike, I kill Soviet troops on the ground in Cuba. Khrushchev will be forced to retaliate, perhaps in Berlin, and within 48 hours, we are launching intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Kennedy recognizes that an airstrike is an irreversible decision with an unacceptably high probability of triggering a nuclear holocaust. So he applies the ultimate manifestation of Falkland's Law.
He looks at the timeline.
He looks at the timeline and asks the critical question, must I strike today to survive? And the intelligence indicates the missiles are not yet fully armed. He has a tiny sliver of time, so he deliberately delays the military action.
He rejects the binary choice of the generals. He opts for the naval quarantine, the blockade. But I have to push back here, because from the outside, that looks like a massive, terrifying gamble. By delaying the strike, wasn't he giving the Soviets the exact time they needed to complete the missile installations?
It was a monumental risk, yes, but it was a calculated one based on information asymmetry. Kennedy knew what a strike would cause, but he didn't know Khrushchev's ultimate intent. What the delay bought him was the one resource more valuable than tactical surprise.
Which was?
Time for back-channel communication.
Oh, right. By not blowing up the sites on day 2, He creates the space for his brother, Robert Kennedy, to have secret, late-night meetings with the Soviet ambassador, Anatoly Dobrinin.
Exactly. The deliberate delay allowed the diplomatic mechanism to function. It gave Khrushchev the necessary time to realize the U.S. resolve, to step back from the brink, and to negotiate a mutual withdrawal of missiles, Soviet missiles from Cuba and U.S. missiles from Turkey.
Because Kennedy endured the agonizing pressure of waiting and refused to make the ultimate irreversible decision prematurely, nuclear war was averted.
That is the perfect illustration of how delaying action creates space for alternatives to emerge that are literally invisible in the heat of the initial panic.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, the source material transitions from the Cold War to two very recent, highly complex modern case studies regarding uncertainty. Before we dive into these, I need to make something explicitly clear to our listeners.
Yes, a vital disclaimer here.
We are about to discuss the early global response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2016 Brexit vote. We are analyzing these events strictly and purely as mechanical case studies regarding the timing of executive decisions and the gathering of data.
Right.
We're taking absolutely no political stance on the public health policies or the geopolitical outcomes. We are simply unpacking what the sources highlight about the risks of rapid commitment versus strategic delay.
Understood. Let's look at the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020 through the lens of information asymmetry.
Right?
The world was facing a novel pathogen. The baseline data regarding transmission rates, mortality, and hospital strain was wildly incomplete and often contradictory. Global leaders were forced to navigate a crisis with almost no visibility.
The sources contrast the varying strategies nations used regarding when to enact sweeping policies. For example, the material points to Sweden's early approach.
Yes, their leadership opted for a strategy heavily weighted toward observing and gathering localized data. They delayed imposing severe national lockdown restrictions.
Their rationale, as analyzed in the text, was to wait for the epidemiological data to dictate the necessity and scale of the intervention. They endured the intense international criticism of appearing to do nothing in the short term, prioritizing the long-term observation of the virus's specific trajectory within their borders before committing to policies that would radically alter their society.
Now, in stark contrast regarding decision timing, the sources point to the initial strategy in India. In March 2020, facing the same massive uncertainty, the leadership implemented a sudden, incredibly strict national lockdown with only a few hours' notice for a population of over 1 billion people.
The sources highlight this as a prime example of an immediate, sweeping decision made before localized data could be fully synthesized or logistical contingencies prepared. And according to the analysis, this rapid commitment triggered massive, unforeseen secondary crises.
Right. The sudden halt of the economy and transportation led to an immediate crisis of mass internal migration, with millions of daily wage workers suddenly stranded in cities without income, forced to walk hundreds of miles back to their villages.
Again, viewing this entirely objectively regarding timing, the sources use this contrast to illustrate how an immediate massive intervention in a complex system made before sufficient data is gathered can inadvertently spawn secondary disasters that a period of strategic delay might have foreseen and mitigated.
It is a profound study in the friction between the demand for immediate leadership action and the reality of incomplete information. And the sources apply this exact same analytical framework to the 2016 Brexit referendum.
Let's look at the mechanics of David Cameron's decision to hold that vote. The critique in the source material isn't about whether leaving the European Union was inherently good or bad. The critique is entirely focused on the timing of the decision to trigger the referendum.
The argument rooted in Falkland's law is that the referendum did not legally or structurally have to happen at that exact moment in 2016. Cameron rushed the vote largely to resolve internal political pressures within his own party.
He used a massive national mechanism to solve a short-term political headache. And the sources point out that he called for the vote without having built any clear, detailed contingency plans for what a Leave victory would mechanically require.
Exactly. There was no deep economic modeling regarding the decoupling of supply chains, no finalized strategy for the Northern Ireland border, no framework for future trade negotiations.
He forced a monumental binary decision upon the nation before the landscape was eliminated. A deliberate strategic delay could have fundamentally changed the dynamic.
It really could have. If the government had waited, they could have spent 2 years building those economic models, drafting a comprehensive exit strategy, and thoroughly educating the public on the harsh logistical realities of the divorce.
They could have gathered the data first. But because the decision was rushed, the vote took place in a vacuum of information, which plunged the UK into years of chaotic political infighting, economic uncertainty, and deep social division as they tried to figure out the plan after the decision had already been made.
Which leads us back to the core warning for leaders. Moving fast without necessity doesn't make you agile. It means you are outrunning your own headlights. You are accelerating into the dark. Executive restraint is the discipline of waiting for your headlights to illuminate the obstacles before you turn the wheel.
That makes perfect sense for statecraft and corporate strategy, but if you're listening to this, I'm sure a red flag is going up in your mind right now.
Oh, definitely.
Because with all this historical evidence supporting restraint, from Kennedy to markets to personal psychology, we have to confront the very obvious danger of this philosophy. When does doing nothing become gross negligence? When is Falkland's Law actually a terrible idea?
This is the critical boundary line. Falkland's Law is a highly effective practical heuristic. It is not an absolute law of physics. The most important skill in utilizing this principle is developing the situational awareness to know when not to use it.
We have to clearly define the difference between strategic patience and dangerous procrastination.
The defining metric is the trajectory of the risk. You must evaluate the baseline reality and ask yourself, if I do nothing, does the situation inherently rapidly worsen? If the answer is yes, Falkland's Law does not apply.
Right. Let's use a visceral example. If you are cooking in your kitchen, you turn your back and a grease fire erupts on the stove. You do not stand there, stroke your chin and say, I shall apply the wisdom of the 17th century. Let me observe the trajectory of the flames for a few hours to see if intervention is truly necessary.
You would burn your house down. In a rapidly escalating physical crisis, inaction is destruction.
When immediate action is required to prevent catastrophic loss, you must act with maximum speed.
Exactly. We discussed the patient waiting for the biopsy earlier. Waiting was strategic because the potential tumor was slow-moving. The trajectory of risk over a few weeks was flat. But consider a completely different medical scenario. A patient is brought into the ER after a car crash with a severed femoral artery.
There's no wait and observe protocol there.
None. The medical team doesn't hold a committee meeting to gather more data on the patient's blood type before attempting to stop the bleeding. They apply a tourniquet instantly. When the clock is actively working against biological survival, you cannot pause.
The same logic applies to large-scale emergencies, like a natural disaster. If meteorologists track a Category 5 hurricane that is hours away from making direct landfall in a coastal city, the local government cannot delay.
No, they don't say, let's wait for the wind to hit the buildings to gather accurate data on structural integrity.
Right. They execute mass evacuation protocols immediately because the cost of a false positive evacuating unnecessarily is infinitely lower than the cost of a false negative failing to evacuate and losing thousands of lives.
Applying Falkland's Law requires brutal psychological honesty. You have to interrogate your own motives for wanting to delay. Are you delaying because you strategically lack the vital information needed to make an optimal choice? Or are you delaying because you are simply terrified of the responsibility of making the wrong choice and you're hoping the problem will magically disappear or someone else will solve it for you?
If it's the latter, that's just cowardice dressed up as philosophy. Falkland's Law offers no cover for neglecting your responsibilities.
So the art is in the triage. You must quickly determine, am I dealing with a slow-moving strategic puzzle where time is an ally? Or am I dealing with a fast-moving physical emergency where time is an enemy?
Okay, so we've covered the grand historical sweep, the deep neuroscience, the global executive case studies, and the critical warnings about negligence. How do we synthesize all of this? If I'm listening to this on my commute right now, how do I actually apply this abstract wisdom to the chaos of my daily life the minute I step into the office or walk through my front door?
The source material provides a deeply practical mechanism for this. We can distill all of this philosophy into a mental checklist, a sequence of 5 specific questions you can run through before making any significant choice. Think of it as the Falkland framework for triaging your daily life.
A diagnostic tool for the modern mind. I love this. What is the very first filter we pass a problem through?
Question 1. Do I actually need to decide this right now? You have to interrogate the timeline. Is there a hard, external, immovable deadline dictated by reality, or is the urgency entirely manufactured by my own anxiety or someone else's impatience?
My experience in the corporate world is that 90% of emergencies are totally fake. An urgent email from a client on a Friday night demanding an answer about a project that isn't launching for 3 months. The urgency isn't real, it's just their anxiety trying to infect my weekend.
Which perfectly sets up question 2. What happens if I do nothing? This requires you to run a realistic simulation of inaction. If I don't reply to that Friday night email until Monday morning, will the project collapse? Will the company go bankrupt?
Usually the answer is no. Doing nothing just maintains the status quo. The client might be slightly annoyed, but the actual structural integrity of the project remains perfectly intact.
Question 3 forces you to look at the other side of the coin. What happens if I act? What are the immediate, irreversible consequences of pulling the trigger right now in this suboptimal state?
Right. If I reply to the client while I'm tired and irritated on Friday night, might I snap at them? Might I make a commitment I haven't properly costed out? Am I locking myself into a bad path just to clear the email from my inbox?
Exactly. Question 4 is about data. Is there enough information to make an intelligent choice? Going back to the metaverse example, do I actually know what the consumer adoption rate will be, or am I just guessing based on blog posts because I hate the feeling of being left behind? If you are guessing on the major variables, you are gambling, not deciding.
And finally, question 5, which requires the deepest self-reflection. Am I deciding because the situation genuinely requires resolution, or am I deciding just because I feel pressured by society, my peers, or my own ego?
Oh, the ego trap. Making a fast decision in a meeting just so you look like the smartest, most decisive person in the room, even if you have no idea what you're doing.
We've all seen that happen.
If you run your daily stressors through those 5 questions, the vast majority of your mental clutter simply evaporates. You realize how few things actually demand your immediate prefrontal glucose. And we see highly successful people institutionalize this through the practice of daily limits.
This is a fascinating tactic. You hear about CEOs who rigidly construct their lives to limit the sheer number of micro-decisions they make before noon.
It is an aggressive defense of their cognitive RAM. This is the logic behind Steve Jobs wearing the exact same black turtleneck and jeans every single day, or Barack Obama limiting his wardrobe to only gray or blue suits during his presidency.
They looked at the morning decision of what should I wear and realized it was fundamentally unnecessary. It has zero impact on their core mission, yet it burns a fraction of their daily metabolic fuel.
So they eliminate it. They automate the routine, they eat the same breakfast, schedule their workouts at the exact same time, and wear the same clothes. By refusing to make unnecessary choices in the morning, they preserve their mental clarity and cognitive stamina for the massive, high-stakes decisions of statecraft or corporate strategy they will face at 4:00 p.m.
That is something anyone can apply. Automate your mornings. But how does this translate to our personal lives? Because we aren't just workers. We have families, partners, children. Emotions run incredibly high in our homes.
Applying Falkland's law to interpersonal relationships is genuinely transformative. Think about the mechanics of a heated argument with your spouse or partner. They say something that triggers an insecurity. The immediate emotional reflex, the amygdala hijack, is to snap back. You want to deploy a cutting remark to win the argument in that exact microsecond.
You feel that burning need to make a rapid decision about what to say next to defend yourself. And because you are flooded with emotion, whatever you say is usually designed to inflict maximum damage.
But if you train yourself to apply the law in that moment, you create a circuit breaker. You realize, I do not need to resolve this entire complex relationship dynamic in the next 3 seconds. So you delay the decision to speak, you take a breath, you walk into the other room.
You let the physiological flood of anger subside.
Yes. By delaying the impulsive choice, you prevent long-term structural damage to the relationship over a short-term emotional spike. When you re-engage an hour later, your prefrontal cortex is back online and you can communicate rationally.
I see this profoundly in parenting too. When you are watching your kid try to solve a puzzle, or struggle with a homework problem, or navigate a minor conflict with a friend, the parental instinct is to immediately swoop in. You want to fix the problem. You want to make the decision for them to save them from frustration.
But if the child is not in physical danger, what happens if you apply question 2? What happens if you do nothing?
You stand back and observe. You endure the slight discomfort of watching them struggle. And more often than not, the child eventually realizes their own mistake. They try a different puzzle piece. They figure out the math problem. They negotiate with their friend.
By not issuing an immediate, heavy-handed correction, you are actually giving them the space to develop cognitive resilience and problem-solving skills. Your deliberate inaction is a far more effective long-term parenting strategy than constant, overbearing interference.
It all comes back to creating space. Think back to the allegory of Emma at the very beginning of this deep dive. When she internalized Benjamin's advice, her life didn't magically become a utopia devoid of complex problems.
No, the external world remained just as complex, but her internal world transformed.
She stopped fighting phantom battles. She stopped running simulations for futures that hadn't arrived. She cleared the background apps running in her brain.
By systematically identifying and eliminating the unneeded priorities, she stopped the drain on her energy. She found the mental clarity required to actually engage with the present moment. She took her psychology off of the destructive fast-forward setting.
So as we pull back and look at the massive landscape we've covered today, we've gone from a 17th century Viscount navigating a civil war, to the metabolic limits of the human brain, to the terror of the Cuban Missile Crisis, all the way down to how we argue in our kitchens. Despite the vastly different scales, the core lesson is remarkably cohesive.
It operates as a unified theory of strategic restraint.
We have to actively, consciously resist the societal programming that demands we always be seen as doing something. Motion is not meaning. Action does not inherently equal progress. In a world obsessed with speed, the pressure to move fast is very often just a trap that forces us into catastrophic mistakes we could have easily avoided if we had just taken a breath.
We must cultivate the profound discipline of waiting, as the source material so eloquently summarizes the ultimate lesson of this law. Not every problem demands an immediate answer. Sometimes the wisest move is to step back, observe, gather information, and let time reveal whether a decision is even necessary.
If our modern world measures success purely by how fast we move, what incredible opportunities, what moments of clarity, and what deep peace are we completely missing just because we refuse to stand still? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I encourage you to look at the very next stressful choice you face today. Pause the ticking clock in your head and ask yourself, is a decision actually necessary right now? We'll see you next time.